Norris's Kitchen. I hope all of you have enjoyed today's menu with my guest and friend, Susie Norris. But let me tell you a little bit about Susie Norris before we begin. All right. Not only is she a cookbook author of now 3 books, today we're here to celebrate A Baker's Passport, which came out earlier this year in February 2019. And let me tell you just a little bit about Susie. And it's funny because one of our chefs, which many of you know, our chef Mickey Hackney, Chef Mickey has been with us for like 15, 16 years. And Susie actually was her pastry instructor way back when. So for those who know Chef Mickey, there's this tight community here in Southern California, how everybody in the foodie community is really connected with each other. Anyway, so let me tell you a little bit more about Susie here. She is a pastry chef, an educator, and a food-focused traveler. She taught baking at Le Cordon Bleu College of Culinary Arts and ran an award-winning artisan chocolate business in Los Angeles for a decade. Her books, I mentioned that she's done 2 others, include Chocolate Bliss back in 2008, handcrafted candy bars that she did with Susan Higger in 2013, and of course, today's celebration of the Baker's Passport that came out earlier this year. Her culinary travel blog, foodmarketgypsy.com, which many of you probably know her by. She became the winner of the IACP, which is the event that we have met at over the years, where she won the IACP Digital Media Award just a few years ago. So congratulations on that. I'm jealous. Prior to her work in the food business, Susie has been an executive with NBC, CBS, Disney, ABC. Give me some Disney tickets.
Oh, I'm out of the business. I gave you some brownies.
Okay, or brownies. And other networks where she supervised television writing and production. That's probably why she's up here making her presence there, because she's very involved with the media. But her background is that she got a BA in English literature from Boston College. And she has gotten a degree and certificate in professional baking and chocolate work. She has recently appeared on KTLA, Morning News, and NBC, syndicated show, Daytime at WFLA. But I'm going to have Susie tell you a little bit more about her and about today's excitement for the celebration of her book. So, Susie Norris.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Robert and I met at IACP events, as he mentioned, and I was always aware of the fresh produce and Melissa's presence and how important that is to us in the food business. And really important to me as a baking teacher for all these years, one of the things we taught students is the quality of the ingredients is super important. And as I was teaching, I got very interested in the classics because I was often telling students about where a cake was from or why ingredients were used a particular way. And they were kind of looking out the window and checking the watch, probably going, isn't that interesting? You know, this is really important where these things come from. And in particular, the fancier cakes like the Dobosh tort from Hungary or the Paris opera cake piqued my interest in how they were made and when they were made and why they were made. So that's the genesis of this book. And this book is based on the culinary travel blog that Robert mentioned, Food Market Gypsy, because it became a way of life, is culinary travel. It's when you're going someplace, instead of starting at the tourist attraction, start at the market. And then you're going to understand what are people eating and what are the cuisines of this region and what are they doing with it and who's around. So you really get a little bit more a local orientation to the food scene. So that's how this all started. And it is both sweet and savory baking. We think often of baking as sweet. We think of our cookies and our cakes and then less sweet to the breads, all true and all accurate. But baking and roasting are technically very similar. They're both dry heat cooking methods. And so if you expand the idea of baking to include anything that comes out of your oven, that gives us casseroles, that gives us roast meats, roast birds, holiday food. So it's wonderful that we're here today talking a little bit about things that might be great for the upcoming holidays. One thing that you guys have sampled and we're going to try today is the cranberry bread. Did anyone try the cranberry bread? Yes? Good? All right. That's a very simple thing to make. That is a quick bread, and it starts with cranberries. And these are important to me, as I was telling you earlier, because when I was starting out my career in Boston, I worked in the ad business, and our client was Ocean Spray Cranberries. And so for a young person to be able to go to a business meeting off in the cranberry bogs seemed pretty spectacular. And to this day, I still, whenever I can find a reason to go and visit a food producer, I still do. So what we're going to do is get a big bowl like this one, and we're going to sift our dry ingredients first. And as we go through the book, A Baker's Passport, I will repeat the instructions every time. I don't say, oh, go to the first chapter where I taught you how to sift. It's like, no, every time I'm going to tell you how to sift. Every time I'm going to tell you how to make a pie dough that's right for this recipe, because then you'll have it all there in one place, which I think is better. But what I like to do is start with my mise en place. Yes, we have all of our ingredients together, and Melissa's chefs have been so kind to do this for me. This is a very important step for bakers, because how many times have we been starting that wonderful dessert that you're going to do for the dinner party, and you get halfway through and you go, no eggs. I have no eggs. What am I going to do? Your whole schedule's thrown off. So you want to make sure that you have everything you need before you begin. One of the things I'm trying to do with this book also is teach. And that is because too many people don't know how to bake. Like, they don't know how to make that dessert. They're going to go by the grocery store and get it. But they can be wonderfully simple. And many of you had the Yule log today, which is a sort of complex dessert. But on the top of that was a chocolate ganache. Very simple, very classic. And all that is chocolate and cream. And you stir it together, and you have a very, very classic, flavorful, rich dessert component. So I want to make sure people understand that this is possible. It doesn't have to be difficult just because it's homemade. All right, so we're going to start with our dry ingredients. Sift them together. And if you don't have a sifter, that's okay. On a quick bread, it's probably, okay, maybe we do have a sifter. You already thought of that for me. Thank you. Always good to sift. You know, it makes sure that you don't have any lumps in your flour and any other foreign objects, like, I don't know, a pecan or something that might have tucked in there. This is the baking soda and salt. So when we sift, we're also aerating. You work with the mixer and you put in the flour and it flies back at you. This is a way to avoid that. I'm also able to get the lumps out of it. You don't want lumps. And lumps happen from just sitting in your cupboard, or moisture. All gone. Okay. Now, another thing I do in my recipes is, and some people do, some people don't, is we set it aside. Whenever you need to just do a task and set those ingredients aside, work on something else, I indicate that for you. So we set aside, that's what it means. Okay, so now we're going to add these into the bowl. I just wanted to show you the technique. We're going to use it for the cookies. Once you've sifted it, you're going to get it into your bowl like that. This is a little more essential when we're working with cookies or items that we're already creaming in the mixer. But just as a habit, it always works. I think it's great. Okay, nice and neat there. Then we're going to add our moisture ingredients. So we've got milk, sugar. Our flavor comes from the zest. And this is a quick bread. So we're just going to whip it all together. You don't have to worry about a lot of steps or a lot of temperatures or any of that stuff. Quick bread, very easy. Sometimes we want to mix our eggs before we get those in there. And you guys know when you're doing a cake batter, you would whip a lot of air in there. This we don't need a lot, we just need a little. Bring it together. And we continue with our wet ingredients. Eggs, milk. Whole milk works here. I often sub in 2% and whole. Either one, I use them interchangeably. It's up to you. Whole milk is just gives you a little bit more fat. We love fat. We love fat in baking. Fat is flavor. So true. All right, you already see this batter coming together. We're now going to add some lemon juice and some vanilla. And we have zest here as well. And you guys have the recipe now, so you'll be able to make this very easily. Oops. Bit of oil. And then we get on with the sugar. And my favorite, the cranberries. What we've done here is, as you see, we've cut some of them to just give just a little more texture. We've never really looked inside a cranberry, have we? Or, I mean, maybe you have. I hadn't until I started working with these like that. You know, just a bit more texture, a little more color. And you dump all those in. I sometimes hold a handful out that you can decorate the top of your pan with, the top when you put the batter in, so you can kind of stage where these cranberries are going to fall. Always thinking of presentation. At this point, I'm going to switch over to a spatula. We're just going to stir it together. Now I'm looking to smooth it all out. No lumps, no streaks. That's it, ready to go. We can do pecans. You can hold these back if you have people with nut allergies. Don't kill them. And what I wouldn't do is, because we're working with baking soda, baking powder, I wouldn't let this sit in the fridge overnight and bake it the next morning. I would go ahead and bake it when you put it together. So we have our loaf pans lined with parchment, and you just pour it in. For one big loaf, we're going to just put it all in there. You can double this recipe if you're doing holiday gifts. Makes a nice one. And sometimes what I do is if pans are on sale, get a bunch of them, because then again, you created another layer of your gift. If you're giving someone a pan with a fresh baked cranberry bread and a big bow on it, it's like, okay, no question that that's a good gift. I'm going to take these and do a little line on top. I believe that was under 5 minutes, was it not? Okay, that's very easy. You bake that off. You're looking for a golden brown color on top. It'll rise a little bit. And you would test for doneness like you would a cake, in that you're going to test a toothpick in there, and you want the toothpick to come out with only minimal crumbs, no batter. Okay, that is that. I guess we'll put that in the oven at some point. Now, let us move on to the cookies that you had for lunch. These are based on the samosas, the Girl Scout cookies. And now, where did these really come from? I can't say for sure. But when we broke down how do you make those at home, we are using classic techniques that we suspect were probably the original versions of these cookies before they became a commercial product. So most things that we experience do have origins in classic baking. I'm thinking of macarons. I'm thinking of any kind of sandwich cookie, like a Brussels. Does anyone enjoy those Brussels from Pepperidge Farm? Fine product. We have a version in the book that's really just an oatmeal lace cookie sandwiched together with chocolate ganache like you had on the top of this cookie. So you start to deconstruct these classic cookies that you see commercially, and you can find a way to do them in an artisan style. So that's what we did with this cookie. And I'll pull one over here so we can see. What you have is the base is a pâte sucrée. Anybody familiar with pâte sucrée? It's a sugar paste, right? It's a very classic French dough. It's very simple. It's a short dough as opposed to a dough with long gluten strands. That's why we call it a short dough. And it's sweet. It's sturdy. It makes a wonderful component to build other flavors on. In this case, we have got caramel and coconut that we have brought together and cooked. So that is a kind of cooked caramel. And then we put a chocolate ganache on top. So that's how we did it. We broke it down. And I'm going to show you guys how to do that. And we'll start with this. Move this away. Thank you very much. Now, we have, good. So in this one, in the recipes, you'll find that they are timed out. So in this case, we're going to make that cookie base first, and then as it bakes, we're going to then do the topping. So you can be efficient in the kitchen. You can also do this dough the night before. This one is less fragile, I should say, or it's just less chemically reactive than the quick bread that we did earlier. So we're going to cream the butter and sugar together. We are in a good place with butter because we are now able to get artisan butter more easily. Local butter, European butter. You guys know the Ploeger brand, for instance, and the high fat content. That really makes such a difference. It just gives you more flavor. So I love working with those. So butter and sugar together. We're going to cream those up. And then we start to add the rest. So you don't want to overdo that creaming. I think that's, you know, when you go to the bake sale and there's the chocolate chip cookies that are like this, like they're like pancakes with chocolate chips in them. That's usually a result of how people work with their butter. You generally want butter to be cold, and you don't want to work it a lot because you want it to retain its shape. So we're going to go light on that, just enough to bring it together. Now, let me see this one different than mine. There it goes. And we'll do that thing again with the parchment paper. Where we sift in our ingredients and add them. Flour. Salt and leavener. And you'll see now why I always do it this way. Because now that we've brought this together just a bit, we can add our dry ingredients in without creating a huge mess. Dry ingredients, I usually do half and half. Put half in, mix it a bit, put the other half in. Then you're just not going to have everything flying all over the kitchen. And a lot of cakes will call for you to alternate your dry and moist ingredients. And this is, again, a pretty good technique for that. We'll add our eggs. We'll add our dairy. And here we're taking that. This is what I've just done this far is a classic pâte sucrée. We're adding coconut into this. You can toast that coconut if you like, or chop it if you like, and that'll just give you a little more texture on the base. Vanilla for flavor. And that's it. I do all my doughs in a mixer like this one. My pie dough, my cake mix, I find them incredibly versatile. And you guys can see, here's our texture. And you want to chill that. You're going to chill that, and then we punch it out, and then we make the caramel. So this goes in the fridge for about 20 minutes. You can put it in the fridge overnight, no problem. While we're thinking about that, I made a batch in advance so I could show you guys how to handle the shaping of it. This is a pretty great recipe to do with kids because it's fun. You can go on parchment or you can go on a marble or granite like we have here. You can roll the whole dough out, or you can do little balls and then shape them around one finger to do kind of basically a donut. How you get to donut, there's different ways. Another way, let me show you. We can make this happen. Another way is to punch it out with a like a biscuit cutter, something like that. That's going to give you more uniform shape. I think I like the messy way myself. Just suits me better. And again, when you're working with really cold dough, it's going to be better. So yeah, this one's not quite behaving, but then we go like this, and it's all fine. Okay, so you shape them, you chill it, and then we make the caramel topping. Anybody afraid of making caramel? Yeah? Okay, we're gonna address that. You know how when you're making dinner, you're gonna turn on the oven and it's to what temperature? 350, right? Caramel cooks at 310. So you're already working with hotter ingredients than the caramel. So don't be scared. It's going to be fun. It's fun. I can say this because I was really terrified of caramel, and it took me a while not to be, but it's really just trial and error. The danger is if it crystallizes. Anybody had that where all your whole big pan turns into this terrible like rock formation? That happens sometimes. What I find keeps that from happening is if you let your sugar and your water just absorb each other there in the pan for a few minutes before you go. We get a consistency called wet sand consistency. So it's okay to stir it. It's okay to make sure that all the particles are off the side of the pan. And by that, this is a little bit of a different recipe because we're cooking it with condensed milk. But here's your sugar. I would add maybe a half a cup of water, half to 3/4 of a cup of water here. Let it sit and then turn it on. Don't stir it while you're cooking it, which is hard to do, right? You kind of want to stir it because it's kind of bubbling and stuff. Just let it bubble, just let it go. And you will find that the color starts to happen around the rim. And that's when you can start to be ready to stop the cooking. So what I usually have is a bowl of ice, and I let that caramel go, even though it's making me nervous because it's turning brown and it's turning brown. And then you go, when it's the color of honey, a light honey, you can then shock it and put it on that ice. That's going to stop the cooking. It'll continue going a little darker, and then you'll have a rich, dark, honey-colored caramel, the kind that has flavor, and you're not going to be burned. You're going to be fine. You've got the ice right there. If something splashes, the ice will take care of that. And so making caramel is a wonderful, great, fun thing to do. Now, this, we're going to go a little bit easier. We're just going to put everything together except the coconut and let it cook for about 5 minutes. We're not too concerned about the depth of color as we would be if we were just making a caramel, say, to dip a pastry in. This one, we're just going to bring it a little bit of color because we know we're going to bake it later. So I've got, that's evaporated milk. This is butter. my vanilla, egg, salt. You just throw it all in there. And I go medium heat, medium high. Yes, we want it very hot, but we don't have to blast it. I think that's where people get in a bit of trouble with making caramel is they're really trying to blast it hard. We don't have to do that. When all the butter's melted, when all the sugar has started to have a little bit of color, that is when we're going to add the coconut. So I stirred a little bit. I'm just going to let it go and prepare my pan. So we will have these cookies already baked, and we will then wait for this caramel to come together. We'll add coconut to it, and then we'll decorate it with the chocolate. That's just chocolate ganache, and that's 50% chocolate of your choice. I prefer personally the dark, like about 60 to 70% dark chocolate, and cream, and a little salt, a little vanilla. You can, play with that little bourbon, maybe. You can really have some fun with that. Yeah, let's see if we can get a consistency happening here. And while we're waiting, let me tell you a little bit more about the book. You'll see a lot of stories that give you the history. We're working with a lot of the French patisserie tradition. So what is the history of that Paris opera cake, for instance? And in that case, it was considered very modern at the time. You guys are all familiar with that shiny top of the Paris opera cake, and it's very, very rich. It's a sponge cake and mocha buttercream, and wow, it's hazelnuts and all kinds of things. And at the time, most cakes were considered quite frilly, and this one had this slick black top of chocolate. This is a ganache, like the one we've been working with, and it was named for the Paris Opera because the pastry chef's wife said, "Oh, it reminds me of the stage of the Paris Opera." So Paris Opera kind of thought, "Yeah, it reminds us of the stage too. We'll serve it there." So it became a signature dessert for that very important establishment. A lot of these are from the 1800s, and chocolate didn't really come to Europe until originally like 1500s at the earliest, and then 1600s we're starting to see it in coffee houses and so forth. And that's Shakespeare's time. So this is going way back. And yet when it did really start to evolve in the pastry kitchens, they did a beautiful job and made those classics for us. They had a lot of resources because really these were desserts made for kings and queens. They were aristocratic desserts. And so sugar was expensive. Sugar came from far away. Coffee came from far away. Chocolate came from far away. So these were luxury ingredients, and they were made for kings, queens. That's why there's a certain formality when you go in Europe and you're looking at these classic desserts. So now you see that this is all gotten smooth for the most part. We're going to keep cooking a little longer so we pick up the caramel color. And it'll thicken up a little bit too. We've talked a lot about European desserts. We also have a lot of American desserts in there, American classics. Cornbread from the South. We have breads, yeast breads. Tried a quick bread today. A lot of desserts, as you can imagine. It's really hard for me not to ask you guys a bunch of questions or have you ask me a bunch of questions, but we'll get to that. This caramel is so easy to make because it's got so much fat in it already. It's not a pure caramel. Pure caramel is just sugar and sometimes not even water. It's the chemical properties that happen as the sugar melts and changes consistency. But we are seeing now the rim. We're seeing bubbles around the rim. We're going to want the bubbles to go across the whole top. You'll see that in the old-fashioned candy books. They talk about the bubbles going across the top of the mixture and then weaving into each other, as if you were knitting or something, that the bubbles kind of fall up and over each other. This kind of coconut is called Flake Coconut. It's wonderful to toast. It really gets a beautiful color. It gets a little bit brown around the edges and still soft in the center. That's a nice way to do it. You can go plain. You can chop it more. I like it just like this. It's got a lot of. Gonna get a good crunch out of that. That's important. See, now we have the bubbles. See how they're moving towards each other? They're really kind of a full boil. Do that for a few minutes till we see a little color, and then dump this in, ready to go. How we doing on time, Mr. Robert? We good? 5 more minutes? Gonna have to sit here and eat the cookie. We're done. We're done. We just dumped this in. And that is plenty. We've gotten a little more color on it. We know it's cooked, right? Because it's boiled. And we're gonna thicken it up with this coconut, add it on top of the cookie, and bake it off. Oopsie, forgot my salt. You guys might know German chocolate cake, right? Which is not from Germany. It's a chocolate cake with this. This is basically same topping, and it's actually from Texas, and it's the Baker Chocolate Company who had discovered that once they put this recipe on the box of their chocolate, they sold something like 70% more chocolate. So that's why it became a famous recipe. It's not from Germany, but it is a good cake. And now you know how to make the center of it. That is a recipe in the book as well. So this will thicken up as we go, but you get the gist of it. It's pretty much a stovetop, simple thing. We're going to be looking for it to get a little thicker, and it'll wind up like that. Voila. Thank you.